What's up, everybody? Coming at you today kind of with a pre-recorded message because I'm going to be covering something um, that's kind of really important, and I didn't want to do it live just in case I kind of messed up and my brain went cuckoo and I wasn't able to really get my thoughts together in a coherent fashion. But I wanted to talk about a really important topic, and that's the topic that I have seen floating around from some folks that says COVID-19, this coronavirus, this pandemic, is proof that God does not exist. And kind of really what's behind that comment is that, the suffering, the people dying, this perceived evil shows that God doesn't exist. And you got to be really careful with someone who says that kind of stuff, because honestly, a lot of times they may be speaking from a deep place of pain, a deep place of kind of suffering on their own part. They may have family members or friends or other people who have been affected by evil, and it hurts. And they wrestle with a very, very deep sense of, if God is good, if God is loving, if God is kind, then why would God allow this thing to happen? And so when you answer this question, on the one hand, you have to be aware of this and know that they may be coming at this question from a very, very deep place of emotional hurt and pain. And if you just jump into an argument, you're liable to do more harm than good. And so you have to really, really discern what is going on, whether or not they're coming at it from a purely kind of philosophical view, or if they're really coming at it from a place of deep pain. Now, if they're coming at it from a place of deep pain, you got to just be very compassionate, very caring, and try to reach and connect with them with love and compassion, because they're not seeing that from God or for anyone. And so you've got to really be compassionate about that. On the other hand, if it's kind of a philosophical bent that they're taking and saying, God does exist because evil exists. Now that opens up a very different kind of response. And I think part of the response that we as Christians could have is to follow the logic. Let's say, let's grant that you say God doesn't exist. All right, let's say that this virus or some other perceived evil is proof that God doesn't exist. All right, so let's continue to follow the train of thought. Well, what does that mean about this virus then? Now, are you going to call this virus good? Are you going to call this virus evil? What are you going to call it? Because if there is no God, if there is no sense of a transcendent truth, nothing beyond our world, then this virus is simply the world acting as it does, as we understand science and evolution. I mean, evolution says, basically things are survival of the fittest, that we're in this competition in the world, between plants and animals and viruses and insects, all, trying to promote our species, to ensure our existence, to get stronger, to evolve into something much higher. And so in that kind of context, in the context of evolution, this virus is simply the world doing what it's always done. There have always been illnesses, there's always been sicknesses, there's always been pandemics, there have always been natural disasters, and it's a dog-eat-dog world. I mean, animals prey upon other animals, animals prey upon plants, plants try to survive and come up with all kinds of mechanisms like poisons and other things like that to keep from getting eaten. And so this virus is simply a mutation. It is a naturally occurring thing. Even if it may have come out of a lab, it still was brought out of an animal. I mean, it's a natural occurring type of deal. And it is spreading and propagating like it normally does with evolution. And as it's hitting us as humans, it's taking out, basically the people with pre-existing conditions, those who are weaker. It is actually leaving the human race stronger by eradicating those who are elderly and who have pre-existing conditions, who are actually a drain on resources and so on and so forth. Why would you call that bad? If evolution is simply the way things work, if there is no God, if there is no transcendence, why would you call this bad? Why would you call this suffering anything different than what has ever gone on? It's just the way the world works. And, if you live through it, you're lucky, you're blessed, you're the survival of the fittest. Is that direction you want to go? And not only that, if you push that envelope, you remove all hope. There's no hope for people who have died. There's no hope for people who suffer. It's just the way it is. You're out of luck. I want to ask you, is that the worldview that you want to have? Is that the worldview you want to have in regards to this virus? To say there is no God, there is no transcendence. COVID proves it. Is that what you want to set up? And I think the answer for most people is no. We don't want to live in a world with no hope. We don't want to live in a world that is governed by survival of the fittest. That's not the kind of world we hope for. It's not the kind of world that we long for. And so the alternative is to say, okay, well, God does exist, but then why did these things happen? If God is all-loving, and if God cares for creation, then why do we see these bad things that happen? Why do we have these viruses that proliferate and kill people? Why do we have suffering? And this is not an easy question. There are no good answers. But I think we can get some partial ones that help us. And I think one of those partial ones is to say, okay, let's first try to imagine what a world would be without suffering. Let's say God created a world where there was no pain, where there was no hurt, where there was no one who ever went through all kinds of turmoil and sickness and what have you. Let's say that was the way the world was. What are the consequences of that? What are the consequences of a world without pain, without suffering, without anything bad happening to anyone? And I think you got to think about that really, really hard. Because if everything always turned out good for you, if everything was always perfect for you, would you have a sense of gratitude and thankfulness? Would you have a sense of humility? Would you have a sense of saying, okay, I've been through some tough times, and so now I can be truly thankful for the way things are. I've been in pain, so now I know what it means to not suffer. And not only do I now know what it means to hurt, I can see somebody else who is hurting, and I can have empathy for them. See, I think if you were to remove pain and suffering and bad things happening, you would not have any humility, you would not have any gratitude or thankfulness, you wouldn't have any empathy. Because everything was always great and hunky-dory. Now, is a world without thankfulness, humility, and empathy worth living in? I'm not sure that it is. Not only that, let's push it a little further. Because if you were to remove pain, does that include emotional pain? And we humans are really good about causing emotional pain to one another. Why doesn't God just take that away? How can you prevent people from hurting other people? And again, I think you got to think really deeply on that. And I think the answer to that question is the only way to prevent people from hurting other people is to turn them into robots. Basically to program them to where they don't have a choice in any matter. Because in order to be in a relationship with someone, to be in a real relationship, a loving relationship, you have to have a choice. You have to be able to walk away from that relationship. That's what it means to really be with someone and to care for someone. You have that choice, and to prevent any kind of harm, you have to take that choice away. So essentially, you would have to remove free will. Now, would God remove free will like that? Well, not if God wants to be in a relationship with us, a real relationship with us. If God doesn't want us to be robots or pets, we have to have the ability to walk away from him. And so God had to give us free will so that we could cause pain, so that we could cause suffering in order for us to really truly have relationships. So again, those are two things that I think help us understand things. And then the last one, and again, I come at this from a parent's perspective. And I have to ask the question, I guess sometimes you can get in trouble for saying this, but are there times when you allow your children to suffer and have pain so that they learn something from it? Are there times when you allow your children to experience failure so that they can learn humility? Are there times when sometimes you inflict pain to again teach them a lesson of how they should and shouldn't be? And I think you got to answer yes to that question. I mean, I know my kids, they get out of line sometimes. And, I have caused them pain. There were times when I spanked them. That hurt. But it got their attention. It taught them that there was going to be consequences to their actions. Now I don't spank my kids hardly at all. I mean, I don't ever do that now. But I still cause them pain. I take away their devices. I take away their ability to do certain things in the house. And in a way that causes them emotional pain. They don't like it. But it teaches them a lesson. There have been other times when I've seen my kids engaging in activities that they probably shouldn't engage in. Going outside and throwing rocks, or going outside and climbing on things. And I know the chances are they could get hurt. I know if they slip, fall, they could end up in pain. But I let them do it. Have they fallen before? Yep. Have they hurt themselves before? Yep. Have they cut themselves before? Yes, they have. I'm there to help pick up the pieces. I'm there to help them bandage things up. Hope to relieve some of the pain. But it has taught them a lesson. It has helped them to understand why they shouldn't and should not do certain things. Yeah, there were other times. I'll just tell one on one of my daughters. This was not intentional. This was not something that I saw coming. But when she was little, I had told my kids, don't run inside. You're not supposed to run inside. And my daughter had to go to the restroom, and we were at a pizza place, and she had gone to the restroom, and she came tearing out of the aisle. I mean, just running as fast as her little feet could carry her. And she was not aware of the countertop that was there. Now, the countertop was, as I looked at it, it matched the floor. So, I know she wasn't paying attention. She ran and she hit that countertop right there. It caused her feet to fly underneath her. She was screaming and yelling. After I calmed her down, I was like, hey, I told you not to run. Slow down. She learned a lesson from the pain. Now, is it possible that God sees things from a different perspective than we do? Is it possible that God sees and has different reasons for allowing us to suffer and have pain that actually in the long run turn out for our good? That's a big question that we need to answer. And I think as Christians, it's a little easier for us to answer. Because at the heart of Christianity is God who comes to earth. And God doesn't just come to earth to rule over us, to make everything better, to have his way with us, to say, oh, I'm going to come here and I'm going to govern you and I'm going to rule over you with power and might. No, no, no. God doesn't come in the Christian fashion to rule over us with power and authority and might. He comes into our situation to become one like us. One who does not come to be above our suffering, but comes to enter into our suffering. And ultimately, that's what Jesus does as God on earth. He enters into our suffering. He suffers everything that we could possibly suffer. In fact, suffers more than many of us suffer. He suffers injustice at the hands of the Romans and his fellow countrymen. He is beaten, he is bruised, he is destroyed, he's murdered. And you think about that, God is murdered, God is killed in Christianity. There's no other religion that says God dies. Only Christianity says that. But there's a redemptive purpose in Jesus' suffering. There's a redemptive purpose in Jesus' death. We couldn't see it to begin with, but as his disciples thought about what Jesus said, as they thought about his claims and what he did, they came to see that his suffering and that his death was a part of redeeming the world and saving the world. We have a God who saves us through suffering and death. And then on the third day he rose again, which is hope. It's the hope of everlasting life. And so for Christians, suffering, far from being evidence that God doesn't exist, suffering is a call to hope. Suffering is a call to trust. Suffering is a call to say, I may not fully understand what is going on now. I may not fully see the purpose with COVID-19, if there is a good purpose. But I will trust in the God who was willing to suffer with me. I will trust in the God who was willing to suffer death and then change it. A God who will go through the valley of the shadow of death and then bring about life, bring about hope, bring about light. I mean, I know I haven't fully answered the question. I know that scholars and philosophers and people who are a lot smarter than me, who have debated this and dealt with it, still haven't come up with great answers. And I know my answer is not perfect, not in the least. But I think it's a start. I think it's something that we can chew on and wrestle with. And I hope you will chew on and wrestle with this whole thing. Because it's not easy. It's not easy. But in the end, I think when we think through it and we really wrestle with it, we'll come to that place where we realize, hey, God didn't cause COVID-19, but he will sure do something good with it. Thanks for tuning in. I hope you found this helpful. God bless you. Take care.
We hope you have been blessed by this presentation from Bethany Lutheran Church in Fredericksburg. We invite you to worship with us on Sunday mornings at 8, 10:25, or 10:30 a.m. Please like, share, and subscribe this video so that you can help spread the good news of Jesus Christ.